now recording. So now I've got to get, no, that's already up. Go back to that, and go to that. Unfortunately that spoils the surprise of the first slide. But, right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
And I think we're probably going to start because it doesn't look like we're getting any more. Right, so environmental assessment generally, but obviously I'm from BREEAM, Gavin's from BREEAM, so BREEAM has got quite a lot to do with it, and it's talking about all the data, big data and all those sorts of things that you've been hearing about. So first of all, we've got some more coming. Right, just in time for the confessions. It's almost hardly worth doing the raising of the hands, but have we got architects, architectural technologists in the room? Yeah. Any surveyors, or the building kind, or the money kind? No. I won't do the students thing, if that's okay. Yes, I'm still learning too, and yeah. Anybody representing clients, teams, and stuff? Anything to do with BREEAM? Apart from him. And how many have heard me speak before? Okay, that's great, especially the last bit. My turn for confessions. The only thing I bother with anymore now is that this is the institution that organises this day gave me an honorary membership some time ago, and it's the only one I bother with these days. Not entirely because it's free being honorary, but that may have a little bit to do with it. I dropped out of grammar school for various reasons, did some qualifications that everybody goes on about the qualifications, I don't. And then went into general contracting, research at the BRE when it was a proper research establishment run by the government, and then into technical support to design. That was at, some people will remember YRM Partnership Limited, a big multidisciplinary firm listed on the market. I was technical manager there. Did some of my own consultancy in the 90s recession, and it turned out I did quite well, but I didn't feel like I was doing well when I was doing it. And then I went to the RIBA for 15 years. I was director of practice and then director of research. And then after a little period doing some technical writing, which actually sort of continues on for BSI, I came back to BRE and into BREEAM. Off the BREEAM piece, I just mentioned I do lots of standards work to do with the BIM stuff. I rewrote the standard on design management under the mantle of the BIM things. And I also chair all the standards to do with workmanship. I'm a mentor for CIAT, and although I don't go on about my qualifications, I'm quite proud of having a City and Guilds in carpentry and joinery. So back to where we started from. So environmental assessment over the data horizon. We start off with a bit of a truism. 90% of the buildings we'll be using in 50 years' time we can see from the window now. We haven't got any windows. So I've done a surrogate window for you, street view from just outside, and I'm pretty sure that statement is true of that view. That pretty much all of those buildings that we can see in that street view will be the ones we'll be using in 50 years' time. And that represents one of the elephants in the global sustainability room, and that's dealing properly and effectively and efficiently with the existing built environment. A related elephant, of course, is the performance gap, and go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, people were starting to talk about it. The enthusiasts and the boffins were starting to talk about it, but it's only just begun to garner any traction talking about it as a real thing. And the shadow image, I think, represents about how much we understand about it, but we'll come on to that. Many experts have got their own view. I wrote a paper, but if anybody said me last time I was here I was doing a thing about BIM, it's about the planet, and I was very much harder on the way that all the experts have got their pet views on the performance gap, but no one's really done serious research of all kinds, qualitative, quantitative, and all the stuff that needs to be done to get it right, because there's lots of effects on it, and there are loads and loads of experts out there with their views on it, including those from BRE, and so we've got presentations and papers on it, and it's all good stuff, but it's so far just still scratching the surface as far as I'm concerned, and I'd be prepared to discuss that if people want to raise it in questions. Okay, so for this hypothesis, we've got these two elephants, existing building stock being the main thing in terms of building use, and the performance gap. And then the other one is the blisteringly rapid advance that we get in sensors, controls, and all those sorts of things. The Internet of Things, which sort of is a nice handy box that no one really properly describes. I don't know what uniformly described. And I always like to add in, because it helps me tell the story, all those little gizmos and stuff that we've very quickly, I mean amazingly quickly, got used to just having there, and can't live without. And so the hypothesis, should all of this be heralding a shift in emphasis for environmental assessment systems such as BREEAM? And I do like to consider the whole world as well as just BREEAM. And there's two although there's only one question mark, there's two questions there. Is that true? And if so, is it? If it's not true, I'll pack up and go home. And therefore, if this statement is true, is environmental assessment addressing it? So a little bit more scene setting. My passion elsewhere, off-piste from dedicating my life to BREEAM, I have to write a new script with the boss in the room. Happens to be veterans bike racing, and so this is what I do every Tuesday night in the summer. I race at Milton Keynes Bowl, and I am in the picture there, but towards the back in that particular shot. I thought it would be just too much in your face if I brought a picture with me in the front. And you can see there's a whole load of data. I'm not going to embarrass myself by going through the data with you, but I mean, I'm veteran cycle racing in Milton Keynes. That's a kind of small market, but we're all used to technology. Quite sophisticated technology, and I don't make mine public because I don't really want anybody else to know. But loads of these people that you can see in that picture are making all of their data completely public the whole time. And it kind of looks like that, and you can do all sorts of things with it, like you can with data. And it struck me slightly quizzically that a Kobe spreadsheet doesn't look that much different. So it's just getting the message over about we've got all these things that happen in our personal and private lives, and they look like serious things that we have to do for work sometimes. A bit more on topic and a bit less self-indulgent. I imagine several of you in the room can be thinking, "Oh, did I leave the heating on? Let's sort it out from here." Unless this is a Faraday cage, like lecture rooms sometimes are. And there's all sorts of systems out there to do that. BMS. There's a feeling that BMS is quite sophisticated. It kind of can be, but I have an issue, which I'm not going to go into as part of this, with many of the BMS providers and their sophisticated dashboards and things they say they can do with their systems. They're beginning to wake up now, but what they've been interested in for years and years and years is locking you into their environment, a bit like the Apple is to the rest of the personal gadget world. Except perhaps not quite so prevalent, but the big systems providers really want to lock you in. They're just beginning to wake up to the fact that they're going to have to collaborate to actually get anywhere with this. There may be a bit more to this slide that I'm not allowed to tell you about. Let's hope, fingers crossed. But we can't help but be impressed by Formula One telemetry. And a little bit later on, there's another slide, and it's got a big collection of data indicated by a red blob with all the data collected in it. And I'm awfully nervous. The other side of me is awfully nervous about data death stars and sort of collecting too much that you don't know anything about. But it's interesting in terms of Formula One because it's incredibly sophisticated. I could have used aeronautical black boxes or what have you, but at the moment. This is as remembered, as drawn for me by somebody from Formula One. They collect a whole load of data that's available within the team. They collect just about everything they can, but they only use some of that. They've worked out what they need to use. There's a requirement for data from the regulator as well. I'll do that, sorry. From the regulator. and they get lots of their data from outside, stuff that's been submitted, stuff that they know about, their own rules and regulations and things like that. And there's an overlap with the data that's produced by the team and the data that's used by the team. And then there's data that's made public these days. I don't really watch motor racing very much, but you watch it enough to see that you get certain aspects of telemetry up on the screen. So there's data that's made public there as well. So I mean, can this provide us with a useful model? I think that there are aspects of that that are really interesting and we need to explore. Anybody been to BRE? Do you know, this building, it's the one that BREEAM sits in, and it's won many awards. And does anybody know about Carbon Buzz, the project? I probably need to quickly explain what Carbon Buzz is. Carbon Buzz is a project that was set up by the RIBA when I was there, and CIBC, and some other, you can see the list of people on the bottom there, other sort of practices and other interested parties, with the express purpose of collecting data of as designed and actual data in use, with the express purpose of analysing that data to try and help close the performance gap in terms of energy. And so it's an entire project. It won awards as a research project initially. It had an amazing success, got cited as an authority, but it's beginning to peter out a bit now, and BRE amongst some people looking at what we need to do with it in the future. However, this building that you just saw the image of, which is at BRE, the number is probably too small, but it's about 3 times underperforming, if you like, in real time. The last time it submitted measurements, which is about 3 years ago, into the Carbon Buzz platform there. And when you think about it, that building, what it's got going for it, it's at BRE, for heaven's sake. You know, it had a wonderful brief. It's on a closed campus location, which should give you some advantages, I would have thought, to real world. There's really good understanding of value, and in a minute the difference between value and cost sort of comes up. Understanding pretty much everything really it ought to have. It's for the BREEAM staff as well, primarily. There are some other people in that building as well, but you know, so the people in it understand about sustainability. They understand how to use it properly. It was from an exemplary design team. I won't mention who, but I mean, it's easy enough to look up. And a very conscientious construction team actually was on it, and it went way beyond energy in terms of its sustainability credentials as well. One reason it scored so highly in terms of awards. So, you know, what chance for an ordinary building where cost is king as opposed to value? You know, I think I could do a whole half hour on the difference between cost and value. So, no idea about value. The users are more interested in their Porsches than the planet. I'm maybe painting a bleak picture, but you know, lots of you have had clients that are like that. You know, an average design and construction teams. You know, you've got something's got to be average somewhere. So you know, what chance do they stand if that particular building scores like that? And Carbon Buzz, I won't bring up the link, but if you just Google it, there's loads of data up there. It's been a bit dormant for the last few years in terms of submission of data, but you know, the data on there doesn't go out of date. It's still relevant for the time it was observed, and there's loads of stuff on there. Office secure buildings typically as submitted to Carbon Buzz, and these people are submitting voluntary, so they're not the really bad guys. You know, underperformed by around 200%, and there are all sorts of other reasons for that that maybe we'll leave to questioning about the usage and sometimes completely different in terms of the times for uses and stuff like that, utilisation. But you know, the numbers are in the wrong direction. However, many excuses, you know, one man's excuse is another man's reason that people bring up for this underperformance, and that those excuses are an element of the performance gap. People have misunderstood what it was they wanted it to do in the first place, and that's why I go back to saying, well, we're only scratching the surface, because we're taking so much as gospel when we go into these things, and we're finding that the wheel falls off in a completely different place to where we've been thinking about and where regulations cover. I'll do this one. What is environmental assessment? It seems an unnecessary question, but just to put us on the right page with it. So the early version of BREEAM aims and objectives. I mean, in the early ones, people didn't talk much about aims and objectives, so you have to sort of interpret it from a passage, just explaining what BREEAM was about. But was there. I'll put these up quickly because I'm going to put them up again in a minute and talk about them in a bit more detail. And we've got a current version that's just gone through. In fact, it's so hot off the press, I'm not sure if you've approved it yet, Gavin, but I think you have the new version that's been put together. So let's go back to it. So the old one does exactly what everybody thinks BREEAM does, and BREEAM does do. It talks about new construction, it sort of hints about new construction only, as if that's the only thing we need to worry about. And at the time, you know, it was a revolutionary idea, the whole concept of environmental assessment, and BREEAM was the first one. And it's completely understandable, it's not a criticism at all. And to enlighten, as I say, post-Attenborough audience, to raise awareness, seems awfully patronising, even to the man in the street, let alone technical people who are educated to think about these things anyway. But back then, raising awareness was really high on the agenda because it really needed to be done. Okay, so you know, we were up. It wasn't so bad as a set of words, but we were up for a change. You know, there was this kind of attitude about it. If we didn't tell you about it, you wouldn't even think about it. And designers especially really prickle at that notion. You know, the BREEAM is there to tell them what to do. And so the current version, it's now about the built environment generally. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons for expanding BREEAM. We're into communities and we're into infrastructure work. We're into existing buildings and those sorts of things. So for business reasons, we needed to enlarge the way we describe it. But also for the sort of subject that I'm trying to talk about, it's another good reason that we need to talk about it, especially to include that's already there. And then there are a whole load of other places there where it's much more about encouraging rather than wagging the finger. And its message now is more like, use our science to help back you up in what you want to do, rather than if we didn't tell you to do it, you wouldn't do it. Okay, so you know, that is moving really in a good direction to push these things along too. Motivation is something, I'm going to highlight a few things to do with why, I mean the client plays in the end, I guess. So primarily why the client is interested, or any client would be interested in environmental assessment and labelling. A mixture of carrots and sticks. So previously it was like the passion that was involved, you know, the boffins really pushing forward, and you can go back before that sort of to other sorts of enthusiasts and you know, go back into the environmental movements of the early 1960s, for example. But that passion built, and the particular bit got narrowed down into the environmental assessment of built environment. I say primarily at BREEAM and then the World Green Building Councils, which obviously there are national versions of. Government requirements. There were some active government requirements, and there's quite a lot of tacit requirements through governments signing up to having to comply with things, unless you're America. And so there's that angle. And there's market demand. There were leading property specialists and developers and others who could see the advantage of making all sorts of differentiations. And well, I'll come on to that in a minute, a bit about differentiation for differentiation's sake. And so now it's more like just sticking to the three things. I mean, there are loads of others as well. The passion is still there. I mean, one of the things you get out of working in BREEAM, or BRE generally, and especially in BREEAM, is the passion for the subject generally, and the specialisms that people bring to it, and then the generalist trying to join together all the specialisms to make sense of it. I mean, it's quite amazing. Government requirements, pretty much only the tacit ones remain these days, and it's certainly going to go much more that way in the future. But that's probably okay. It's not okay for the people out there trying to sell the business, but it's because it makes it harder. But I think ultimately it's probably okay. market demand, and that's where the biggest increase occurred, with the motivation mostly in the right direction, although there is an element of differentiation for differentiation's sake, you know, and that's exemplified by, even at a small level, by sort of by credit spotting and trying to get the easy ones to get it up. But everybody's going to try and do that. We all did it in our exams, so let's not be too critical of that. But it's definitely moving in the right direction. So if we just reorder those, so now my view is we've got market demand, we've got the passion and the government requirements, because they're mostly tacit. I'm not too precious about the order of the last two. But the other thing is that what carries this thing is data, and that's, you know, I haven't mentioned it for a little while, but I'm beginning to come back to it now. It's data that carries this knowledge, and exploiting that data is becoming an attractive proposition. So I would slip data harvesting in there as a huge influence. Probably never surpass market demand, because the demand's got to be, some demand from somewhere's got to be there for it to be in business anyway. But that the benefits of that data harvesting are really becoming evident now. So a quick aside on the power of data. I just picked this up just yesterday, so I sort of shoehorned it in because I thought, wow, that's interesting. Tesla sells 25,000 cars a year. General Motors sells 2.3 million cars a year. But according to yesterday's Economist, Tesla is now worth more on share capitalisation than General Motors. And okay, it's one more press. It's funny, the Economist article didn't do the sort of the slightly cautious notwithstanding the setbacks bit. They just went blazing in there about its data that's got to do with it. And I do agree with them, but I thought it might be a bit sensitive, so I put notwithstanding the setbacks that you would have read about the self-driving cars and all those sorts of things. That project on its own, they create huge amounts, doesn't matter what gigabyte is, huge amounts of data per second. And the other things that the company involved with are all data centric. It's almost like Tesla isn't about making cars; it's about dealing with data. Right, and more data with this cautiousness about creating Death Star data that you can't penetrate. But that aside, more data should equal greater improvement. Certainly, the potential for greater improvement. Go back to the Formula One analogy. What happens when something goes wrong is that bit of the first bubble that they don't use now, and frankly if they sat and scratched their head for an hour they wouldn't think what they'd ever use it for. Something goes wrong, all of a sudden a bit of it becomes relevant, and it may even become relevant to the governing body as a safety issue or something like that. So generally speaking, more data is greater improvement, and the expression there is continual improvement, which is a concept we'll return to in a moment. Continual improvement is sometimes confused with continuous improvement. They are different things. I won't do the linguistics lecture on why they're different things, but the term to use is continual, not continuous. And it comes from quality management as a term. That's where you'll find the definition for it. Getting back to the motivations, we're coming from the sort of circle of blame type things, and it doesn't matter where you start reading. I'll start at the top, where the owners and users, they'd like to have them, but they can't get them. The designers and constructors, well, we can do it, but there's no market, and the developers can't get the investors to pay, and the investors saying, well, they can't find a demand. Okay, we're beginning to leave that behind, and so this is about creating the environment where these things are likely to happen. The things I'm talking about later are likely to happen into a circle of opportunity, if you like, where the owners and users have realised that they can get. Actually, that sounds like they're paying over the top when you say high price. They can actually get better financial advantage. That's what it's supposed to say. In terms of the operating costs and efficiencies, I summed up a whole load of other things into the word delight. You know, the sort of because there's actually no point in built environment unless it makes you happy, in my view. But that's a whole other lecture. So I've summed all that up in delight. Low tenant turnover, good satisfaction, in other words, and better productivity, all those sorts of things. That list could go on for a long time. And the designers some of them pushed into, but most of them quite willing to go into an integrated approach to design out the waste. It's another one of the standards I sit on to as it happens, and increase efficiency and save cost. The developers are realising that shorter construction duration periods and lower operating costs gives them huge advantages, and the investors are beginning to realise the return on investment. So it's now become a circle of opportunity getting involved in this whole thing called environmental assessment. Did you know there were that many schemes out there in the world? Okay, to move from screen, yeah. So going back to when BREEAM started, way back in 1990, all sorts of things. A lot of them, even the ones that came out wrong. This is a slide I took. You can see at the bottom. I credited it from a relatively recent book on a subject. And what did they do? They missed out BREEAM in use. So I've slipped that one in there at the point it was introduced, because it would have been useless an illustration for my talk today if it wasn't in there. And just to put it right, so I don't know if they missed any others. They also got an E missing, an R and E missing down there. So there are an awful lot there. A lot of them are labelled BREEAM, and my animation went a bit wrong here. So we have BREEAM in use, and BREEAM USA, which is a new venture that Gavin's put together, is primarily about BREEAM in use as well in America. I mean, I think on those everybody would have heard of LEED as the American, and one or two of you may be well travelled and have heard of one or two of the others as well. But there's quite a few of the BREEAM overseas ones, where we have national scheme operators who run them using our core science and then their local science to create the right sort of BREEAM for their country. So many of the national operators, which are the people we have in those countries, offer BREEAM in use as well as part of the portfolio. I haven't bothered to annotate why, but you just believe me, a lot of them do. And there is an international version which has become more like the standard version of BREEAM in use as well, which is where we use it internationally, where we don't have scheme operators. So going back to the elephants in the room, there's the existing building stock and the performance gap and the rapid advances in stuff. So back to the question, should it be heralding a shift in the emphasis for environmental assessment such as BREEAM? I think it should, and is it? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about BREEAM in use now. So in the whole market area, these are UK figures. How they pan out internationally, I've not really studied in depth, but I'm pretty sure that in most of the developed world they pan out similarly in terms of the very top bit there about the capital spend versus the operational spend. They're about the same annually, and most people don't realise that. They think the operational spend is going to be far higher. The capital spend is going to be far higher than the operational spend, because when you talk about things in capital, they're bigger numbers, generally speaking, than instances in operational spend. And in fact, the operational spend in the UK is probably underestimating, because it excludes all the DIY, if you like, all the businesses, a bit like BRE, for example, a campus with portfolio of properties on it, and lots of the stuff we do there is DIY in terms of the operational spend on that portfolio of properties. And there's any number of other organisations where an awful lot of that expenditure is not captured. So that is an underestimate. So the market there, just simply on a market basis, is at least equal, shall we say. So of what we do with BREEAM, the majority of our business is over in the capital spend. So we're dipping into the capital spend pocket, because it does cost to do environmental assessment, and so from a business point of view, that's where we're dipping in. I put communities in the middle there because it's usually about capital spend, but the pocket you dip into to pay for it is usually an operational spend pocket. And then at the moment we've got BREEAM in use doing really well and growing over in this side of things, but maybe we need to accelerate that. And what about elephant 2? The performance gap. I explained carbon buzz a little while ago. That was set up in 2007. BREEAM in use and a thing called ISA, which was a portfolio property management thing, have come together more. Are we still using the ISA logo? No. Yeah. It's It's something that BREEAM in use is sort of enveloped and in terms of the concept of portfolio property management, and just brought it under there. But I thought I'd better mention it because someone might have heard of it. Okay, so this is straight from the website, so it can't be wrong. So it's about establishing the current operational practices, it's about reviewing and improving efficiency across those operations and implementing best practice across that portfolio and working towards efficient maintenance and certification. That's what BREEAM in use is primarily about. Its frames of reference are based in a number of things. It's based in what we've learned from the new construction type BREEAM, you know, the standard, what everybody thinks of BREEAM as being about new construction. It learns from our understanding of the industry and input from the property management organisations. So it's got quite a body of knowledge which contributes to what goes into a BREEAM in use certification. And on the website you can also read case studies, and I'll just bring up one part of that. Beginning to highlight bridging the performance gap now and using BREEAM in use to bridge that performance gap. And it's a really good start in doing that. So by undertaking BREEAM in use assessment, you can start planning environments, simulating positive change based on actual performance data and transform modelled outputs into actual outputs. So it's an online, it's international, it's environment, we know it's an environmental assessment method, and it looks at three sorts of aspects: the assessment of the asset performance, of the building management, and the occupier management. The strong recommendation is that all three should be done. They can, however, be taken in isolation. And my view is that we absolutely desperately need all three to be covered, because occupier management, for example, is part of why I contend that we still don't understand an awful lot about bridging the performance gap. And there's a whole, and that's almost completely unresearched aspect of it. There's an awful lot of stuff where you can come up with numbers in terms of building management, comparing against norms, comparing against each other. That's what Carbon Buzz does, for example. But it doesn't do very much about occupier management. There's a whole load of research, well, I say a whole load, the place where most of the research is going on that side of things is in residential rather than public buildings, although there's some on public buildings, and it's in the centre in Oxford Brookes. So in BREEAM in use there's a yearly renewal cycle to look at the improvements in building performance. And the word continually is used there, and the question is yearly frequent enough? In absolute terms, is it frequent enough? It certainly isn't continual. I mean, you need to collect the data continually to then undergo the renewal cycle, but it's not the same thing as measuring and assessing continually. And is it frequent enough in the light of the potential world of ubiquitous data? And clearly, since I'm still speaking and there's a bit of time left, I think our answer is probably a qualified, probably not really. So everything from this red line onwards is speculation. From the bit in BREEAM that is charged with doing that speculation, and separated from the really hard part about keeping existing business running. So in terms of BREEAM Futures, there are a number of reasons why we're thinking about this, but top of the agenda in terms of the thinking are collecting real-time data to help unlock mysteries of performance gap, and using that to create effective, responsive, continual improvement. I said you would come back to continual improvement measures and programs. Using that to feed back into the capital project side of things, and to inform things like regulation, standards and practice. And of course there is a business angle on it as well, but I think you've got to get this right before you can consider where the business angle is. And it also meshes with plans for greater automation. There's so much data, and the other reason is there's so much data about that others might do it. And from my point of view, it's not just a business competition that others might do it, it's that they'll probably do it badly. Because there's MIT in America has this concept of data exhaust, which is all data that's being puffed out there and people can come and sort of scoop up in all sorts of ways and then use and maybe even make fake news out of it, you know, but maybe it's not quite that bad. But that's the sort of image I have with people sort of scooping up data from all sorts of different places and putting it together in a non-causational way. We are obligated to applying the rigour of our science to anything we do. So a sort of a model is illustrated there. So building information modelling is where a lot of the capital cost data is likely to come from. Anybody who's familiar with that process will maybe have heard of the acronym AIM, which is the asset information model, and there along the centre there the building information model grows during the capital phase, and this down here is the digital plan of work, you know, the replacement, if you like, for the RIBA plan of work, although it's exactly the same. It's not really a replacement. There is now a non-sectarian, if you like, version of a plan of work that all disciplines can apply. And so this is in the capital phase, and it hands over. It doesn't hand over everything. I mean, everybody thinks that I mean, I've seen this shown as a series of snowballs growing, and it doesn't really. I mean, it's not a bad image, but you do need to have a break where the snowball gets smaller and then starts to grow again, I think. And so I've chosen to do it more simply like this. So not all of the information that was necessary to create the thing in the first place goes over, and so that starts off the AIM. You get some other information from elsewhere, and what I'm saying is you need to start adding real-time data into there as well to keep that working. And so this is a sort of cartoon, hardly an image even, of a office environment, and there's all sorts of things that we can measure. Most of these things already appear in BREEAM in use, well, in BREEAM actually as well, in the health and wellbeing parts of putting the building together in the first place. There are things you have to do about all these effects, but this is about collecting real-time data, including the soft data from the users of the spaces, and that's really quite hard. Well, the rest of it, I mean, it's not like falling off a log, but it's theoretically very simple. Technically, it's a little bit more difficult, but there are examples out there already of places that can do all of this and respond incredibly intelligently. And then there's just an image to suggest that it's being monitored real time. And then going through the service life, you've got the asset information model, which needs to be constantly updated. This is a message that's been difficult to get through to the building management system people, and well, not so much those, and the facilities managers, that needs to be kept up to date and constantly updated. Influenced by the real-time data, the analysis that you do and the action that you take, and then the reanalysis, and that's what these cars are supposed to illustrate that happening. And then creating, I mean, I suppose there is a point in doing it even if you don't feed back, because you should make an improvement by doing it, but you need to measure those improvements and feed it back to the beginning of the process or feed it back to other places. And so if we start to superimpose BREEAM on that, you've got the blue bit, which is the capital expenditure focused bits of BREEAM, the ones the original one, the ones we all know about, and ones that everybody thinks BREEAM is just about, although BREEAM in use is getting better known. And then BREEAM in use, and a handle we've put on it just so we know what we're talking about, is BREEAM real time. From a business point of view, that could simply be rolled into another aspect of BREEAM in use, or it could be a separate product. That's why we're below that red line, if you like. We're not, but just for now, I'm going to talk about it as a separate thing in those terms. And so that's how that maps onto that process. So we have a model, and if you remember a little while ago, I spoke about a Death Star of data, and that's this red one here. Desperately don't want it to be a Death Star of data, but I couldn't think of any other way of illustrating it other than as a collection somewhere. And so what we've got in this rather ambitious sort of diagram is a whole load of BREEAM schemes that concentrate on capital expenditure. They aren't vectors, by the way, because if it was, that would be huge, and the rest of them would be very small, and or some of them non-existent, because this is a picture for some time in the future. Those dealing with master planning, those dealing with in use, and I've just explained why I've kept real-time separate. There may be good reasons to merge them together at some point. In terms of what BREEAM does, there may be others as well. We may choose to start to do other things, although there's quite a lot in there at the moment that we already do. Of course, BREEAM is only a part of BRE. BRE does lots of other wonderful stuff, and what it does creates data. So what I've done is I've superimposed this sort of BREEAM pale blue on top of should have been bigger if it was a vector, but a grey bit, which is other data that sort of comes through this hole, sinkhole in the middle there, and gets into this management system. And we've got a product now that manages BREEAM that can, we're told, be developed into managing data much more generally. And as I say, we needed to suggest it's collected together rather than. The reason this hasn't got lots of arrows on it is because this process is supposed to be the ether in which we can manipulate this data in any way we want. But I wanted to show it collected together, so we've got the Death Star of data there. Of course, there's all sorts of open data sources where the people that might do it badly can collect their stuff from, but they also, you can collect stuff from there and do it well. Then there's independent data sources that we might do business with, or have any other sorts of relationships with. Universities, for example, would sit up there probably, although some of them put their information out into the open. And as an example, we're already explained what carbon buzz is and the fact that we're sort of involved in seeing if we can make anything out of that into the future. And so that comes across into a notion here of making data available. Making data available doesn't necessarily mean making data free. The angles on that have to be weighed up and accounted for at the time. But however it's dealt with, it comes back to what I was saying before, it can inform things like regulation, standards, practice and business. So we're better than a whole family of BREEAM schemes, and I think one of the other things we need to do is to make them join up a bit better as a family that flow from one to the other rather better. In terms of populating what I was talking about before now, saying that to find out much more about the performance gap, we need to populate or to provide data in which all sorts of proper research can be undertaken. This is the question here. Has everybody seen the basic BIM level 2 racetrack? You don't have to understand it, where the data goes round from CapEx to OpEx. Okay, so long as you've seen that and know roughly what it's about, what I wanted to get onto this because that is the basis of this bit here. And this is the Digital Built Britain view of the future. BIM level 3 if you like, but it's BIM level 3+++, because it's not just about the BIM aspects, okay? And so you've got that level 2 racetrack going around there, and then you've got all sorts of things here like buildings, transportation, water, power, people. People aren't just added on the end, by the way. I did question that to Mark Hugh, who put this together, and he said no, they're actually the most important, obviously, so we put them at the end, and these are subservient to them, and there could be a lot more, just to give you an idea of the sorts of things. And there's all sorts of things you do using the big data. I'm not going to go through all these things in detail. Just to give you the picture of this whole thing about big data from asset management point of view. And then those things I was just talking about with the circles, unfortunately I changed the colour because it came from a different sort of set of notes, but anyway, they are labelled. And so if we start to superimpose what we can do with BREEAM, and one has to say other environmental assessment procedures and maybe other things as well. On top of this, we can see where they start to fit and can be absolutely crucial in getting good quality, and that's one of the reasons why I think people like we should do it. Good quality data into this whole process to start to improve not just the built environment, but the bits in between the built environment as well, if you like. I'll move on from that because there's far too much on there to explain in any detail. So where does the core data come from? We did a project called RegBIM. It proved that stuff can be done in terms of getting information out, BREEAM information digitally, out of BREEAM into a digital environment. But the way that it was done didn't really work. It wasn't scalable at the time. So for the moment, whether or not what we pursue is by the by. But eventually, it seems inevitable. The writing's on the wall, as they say, that a degree of automation has to happen. And so the model we had then was this bit up here was getting the prose and discourse in current BREEAM manuals into a form of binary questions, which could then be coded. So BREEAM is effectively a rule set. Unscramble it into a set of binary things, which can then be digitized. A dictionary to sort out the terminology, because it really is something that's been written in prose and everybody knows what that means, don't they? Sort of way of writing. Computers don't like that notion at all. You have to teach it what it knows, and so you have to have this thing built into here. And then a rules compliance engine, which is an off-the-shelf one. And so that's a generic process. The BREEAM one is rather more onerous, if you like, because of the certification angles and the way that we license assessors to certify things. And we're getting quite, in fact, a little bit over the end. So I've got an illustrated version of that, which explains all those arrows. You should be getting this anyway, so you can read through these, which shows you what happens to the information. So the tool uses the rules. There's some of the things I just said, but with the addition of the BREEAM assessor and Q&A input to provide the rigor. And then just quickly a series, and what you'll see is you'll see the dark blue rise up. Right, so I'll go right to the last one straight away. And what we reckon is that within a reasonably short space of time, we could collect most of the dark blue digitally, directly from evidence and BREEAM submissions. The top we'll probably always have to do manually. Sorry, and the wiggly line is the fact that we then have to do something to it to make it get into the data pool. And then the interesting bit is the calculable bit, whether it's worth keeping it manual because it's such a simple thing to do, or to try and automate that as well. And that's where any change will occur. So that's the sort of proportions that we're likely to be able to get. So a summary of what I've been doing. The presentation contends that we're approaching a paradigm shift in terms of where the data-centric future and the significance of the static one-off design and new construction-based environmental certification will alter the focus and will increasingly value attributes related to seeking continuous improvement from new and within existing buildings. So I'll go to the next one as well because it mentions it there. So the environmental assessment systems will need to adapt to this by the overhaul of what they do now and by the introduction of new schemes that focus both on individual benchmarking. So there's not going to be a decline in the if you like, standard BREEAM and the new construction capital cost type BREEAM end of things. But the reason for having it will be primarily to provide the benchmark for where you subsequently go through the life of that asset, as opposed to the primary thing is to hang a certificate on the wall. I'm done now. Oh, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Automation will be an enabler of this, and it's something we're beginning to look at. And as Mark Farmer, everybody's read the Farmer report, I expect. It was the flavour of the month late last year. Modernise or die. Presumably a reference to Darwin, who actually said adapt or die, which I prefer. I think we need to adapt. I don't think we'll ever die because we're who we are. We're a little bit over time, sorry about that. Any questions?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Just on your building performance, the BRE establishment, what do you think, what's your thoughts on where the performance gap comes from then?
That particular building, what can I say, Gavin?
Everywhere.
Yeah, it's not really user abuse, which is probably the most common thing in most of the other things that you'll find in the Carbon-Both database. Although there's lack of understanding of the systems that were put in the first place. Lots of them, all of them, is it true to say all of them, pretty much, of the novel systems that were put in no longer function in that building. And that depends who you talk to. I could get into a litigious situation here. You talk to the designers, they'll say, well, it's easy to sort that out. You just haven't bothered, have you? And if you talk to the facilities people, they'll tell you all sorts of convincing reasons why it doesn't. there's the something Gavin and I were talking about before. There is an element of utilisation as well in that. So that just skews the whole measurement chart, if you like, so that it doesn't take the technical stuff with it. It just skews it. It's like. No, I was thinking of when you do botany and you want to study something, you throw a quadrat, don't you, which is a piece of string with a stone in each corner and where it lands, and you strictly only study what's in where it lands. But there's always something a bit more interesting over there, isn't it? And it sort of skews the pitch a bit like that. So, but I think actually, what I take from that question actually, and having scrambled to try and answer it, is the fact that we don't really know all of the detail. And the two sides that think they know this and think they know that have never really talked to each other, and we haven't really tried to sort it out. And we're a good client. I won't have it that we're not a good client. I won't have it that we're not a good asset owner. You know. So again, back to that slide. What chance do people in the rest of the real world? Which is what you've got to design for. You know.
Just thinking, who owns the data at the end of once it's in use, and you're evaluating it?
On which part? I mean,
I was just thinking about the Death Star there.
Sorry.
After that,
the terms would. Let's go back to it. Right. Okay. It's when I said here about making data available doesn't necessarily mean making it free. It also is the point at which you apply the qualifications on the use of that data. So that's qualifications on its rigour, its accuracy, and the sort of the output parameters around it, and also what you can and can't do with it parameters. So that's specifically on that diagram. That's where that would occur. I mean, we've been working on. We've released some data. We've made some data available through an API now from BREEAM. It's nothing spectacular. It's only what you could have copied longhand from the Red Book and Green Book anyway. But we've now made it available automatically through an API. The next phase of that project is to get a set that we maybe might want to charge for and work out what that is. And then when we do that, I mean, there's very little terms and conditions around what we give away, but we may want to consider some slightly tighter conditions around that, for example.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Right, I've got to find that other screen and press the button.